I really made a lot of mistakes in yesterday's entry. This used to happen to me back when I was a video producer. I'm just a little too spacey, and all it takes is to make one mistake, and it ruins the whole shoot. So yesterday's shoot would have been ruined by, my getting too close to the camera and having cut off my eyes like that for a good portion of the shoot. And there was another one I did where there was, I think I put my glass down and the sun was reflecting on it and there was a big spot of light on my face, and all those things would have completely ruined a commercial shoot. But anyway, live and learn. Last night, all of a sudden in the middle of the night, which is actually still the middle of the night, it's 12 minutes after 3, but suddenly things started to occur to me. I started making connections in my mind. And this whole thing that I'm going to present this morning came to me and I couldn't get back to sleep. So being sleep deprived, I'm going to be even a little spacier than usual, but I have made notes, which I think most professors probably work from notes when they give a lecture. And I see why, because if you don't, you'll miss certain key connections. My short-term memory, I guess, isn't so good. And sometimes I have in mind to say something, I'll get off on a tangent and I'll never get back to it. Well, notes keep you on track. What I thought of was that in the Partingtonian Patchwork book by B.P. Shillaber that I presented yesterday, right after Blifkin's The Martyr, which I'm quite certain contains stories about Mathew's unfortunate second arranged marriage, there is a lengthy poem, kind of an epic poem about Dr. Spooner with a philosophical introduction. And the last time I looked at that, I said, this is mine, this is Mathew's, But I didn't have any reason to say that. I didn't have anything to tie it to. I just felt that. And this last time I was in there, I saw it and I had the same feeling. I said, this is mine. So what started to occur to me was the connections. I can build something of a case for it now because I've got so much of Mathew's work. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back and build a case for that. Before we start, there was something I missed. And I guess you'll have to watch yesterday's entry to know what I'm talking about here because I can't really go back to all of it. But in Harvardiana, where Edward Everett Hale, as a 13-year-old boy, appears to have stolen Mathew Franklin Whittier's poems. The second one, To Adela, which is Mathew's love poem to Abby, asking her, can we not, now that you're 16, can we not be physically involved? At least to the point of kissing and hugging anyway. The line starts out, Lady, by the stars that glisten in yon conscious arch above. Well, that's a reference to Abby's love of the stars and her belief that the stars are conscious. Now, she wasn't the only person that had that belief now, so I'm not saying that there aren't others, but then I forgot to mention the second part. By the viewless forms that listen to my plighted vow of love. Viewless forms means spirits. Now, Abby believed not only that the stars were conscious, but that there were spirits. He was a spiritualist before there was a name for it, the spiritualism. And Mathew was a philosopher who was skeptical about a number of the things that Abby tried to teach him at first, but eventually he became convinced. But I'm thinking the timeline was a little quicker than I had originally thought, because unless he's being completely ingenuous here and pretending to believe in things in order to get in her good graces, I don't think Mathew was that devious. So I think that he really was convinced of these things by this time. So I wanted to look at the timeline. Abby turned 16 in 1832. June 2nd, 1832 was her 16th birthday. This would have been written after her 16th birthday, probably not very long after, like the day after maybe. Mathew was making fun of her beliefs earlier. There's one where he makes fun of her belief in prescient dreams in October of 1830. This is in the Constellation, the New York Constellation, which he was editing under the editor-in-chief, Asa Green. And then in April of 1831 comes Abby's poem part of an address to the stars, which is signed AP, and scholars assign it to Albert Pike, no doubt. It was not Albert Pike's, that was Abby Poyen's. And in that, the reason that's relevant is in that she makes a reference to having been talked out of believing in astrology, no doubt temporarily. And the whole poem is basically about, well, you've talked me out of believing in astrology, but I still believe the stars are conscious. You know, that's the theme of it. Then in September of 31, Mathew makes fun of astrology in something called the Almanac of Fortune, where he basically gives a phony horoscope in which he could have normally predicted everything in the horoscope, you know. But I think that in a few months, by the time he writes this poem, I think she must have convinced him, at least if he didn't already believe in spirits, which he may have, she's convinced him of that, and she's apparently convinced him that the stars are conscious. Well, Abby was brilliant, and apparently she was one heck of a debater. You know, you didn't want to cross swords with Abby in a debate, you know. So she must have come around and convinced him. So that's all. I just remembered that little reference. I'm going to put this back in its protective. These are archival plastics I'm using, by the way, in case anybody into archiving and old books is wondering. Now, I've got my notes here. I have to build a case for Dr. Spooner being Matthews, and I'm going to do that now, starting with the carpetbag. Now, I had mentioned that there's this very strange relationship that has emerged concerning Benjamin Penhallow Shillaber, the creator of Mrs. Partington, and Mathew Franklin Whittier. Mathew Franklin Whittier was really very much the senior writer. As I mentioned before, he had, I don't have that in front of me, he had written characters like Mrs. Partington back in 1828, I think he started. So, you know, he was, and I think he was really the better writer and the better humorist. Certainly, when it came to imaginative biographies and autobiographies, Mathew was a master of that genre. Sleep deprivation is getting to me. Basically, what Shillaber was great at is this kind of daft character, Mrs. Partington, and anecdotes. He wrote anecdotes. I think when you see things other than anecdotes in writing that Shillaber has signed, that's probably Mathew Franklin Whittier. I could be wrong about that. He wrote poetry. Shillaber wrote poetry, but not really in the same style that Mathew did. So he was a good writer, but he just wasn't, I know how this sounds, he wasn't brilliant like Mathew was. He didn't have the raw creativity that Mathew had, put it that way. So let's go to the carpetbag, the February 14th, which is to say, I guess, Valentine's Day, right? February 14th, 1852 edition. And there's something very strange in here. I'm going to put it up on the screen. I won't try to hold these big books up in front of the camera anymore. It's called Ike Partington's Visit to the Country. Well, Ike Partington was the orphaned nephew of Mrs. Partington in Shillaber's world. And he was a scamp. He was a juvenile delinquent, basically. And as Shillaber wrote him, he was cruel to animals. And Shillaber apparently thought that was funny, like a lot of people in the 19th century who didn't really have any sense of, again, Christianity officially didn't believe that animals had souls. And cats were kind of something you kept around to catch mice, and dogs were something that sort of hung around and maybe guarded the house and, you know, ate scraps. You know, it wasn't so much. There were people that indulged their pets. But Mathew makes fun of one such person, actually. But Mathew apparently had a dog, because in Blifkin's The Martyr, there's a dog named Sailor Boy. And Mathew, in his Ethan Spike series, wrote of a dog named Gunner, who was like a mascot at the post office where he worked. Well, I kind of figured out what was going on there. I think Sailor Boy was the real name and not Gunner. And Shillaber didn't change it, and Mathew did. And that the reason he's at the post office is that his ex-wife, Jane, whom he had separated from, he lived, you know, in a flat there in Portland and worked at the post office so he could be near his third daughter, Allie, or Alice. And she wouldn't keep the dog, and he didn't want it cooped up all day, so he took the dog to work, and it became like the mascot of the post office, and he played pranks with it. He dressed it up with a hat or a sign that said police officer and sent it into the police office, which was like on one floor up or one floor down in the same building. And there was one other prank he played, I think, with the dog. So he has a whole chapter devoted to Gunner. Well, I think that's Sailor Boy, and I think Mathew had that dog. But here, this story about Ike Partington going to the country is signed with Mathew's star, with an asterisk. I'll put these up on the screen. This is definitely written by Mathew Franklin Whittier and not by Shillaber. What it means is that they were so tight, they were so much collaborators, that Shillaber actually let Mathew write his own character once for the Carpetbag. So this is a smoking gun. This is proof positive that Mathew was that tight with Shillaber and that they collaborated. See, and for further evidence, there is no cruelty to animals. That disclaimer in movies. No animals were injured in the course. Well, there's no animals injured in the course of this Ike Partington story, which is very atypical for Ike, because he did things like hang the family cat and step on a monkey's tail to see whether it was made out of rubber. That's the way Shillaber wrote this character. Well, Mathew wrote him getting his comeuppance, for something he did. So that just proves, that this is Mathew writing for Shillaber, in this case with Shillaber's permission, because he signed it with a star. On the very next page is a letter from Spunkville, which is Ensign Stebbings' town, signed Trismegistus. So I've talked about Trismegistus. So Mathew has a very heavy presence in this paper, even in 1852, no less when it first started, when he was writing like half the paper. So we will now turn to, we'll take a quick look at Dr. Spooner. This is in Partingtonian Patchwork, and this is a logical trail we're making now, detective work. We've established that Mathew wrote for Shillaber, okay? So this comes immediately after Blifkins the Martyr. This is the prose introduction to Dr. Spooner, and there is an image of him surrounded by ladies, probably at a party or something. I'm going to put that up to the screen. I'm not holding these things up to the screen long enough so for them to focus. And of course, you can always stop these. Mathew would very typically give a prose, serious introduction to his humorous pieces. So I'm going to come back to this, but his name is Dr. Dionysius Spooner. And he talks about being in search of the delectable. And we're going to talk about that too. So there's a long introduction, then there's a long epic poem. And the gist of it is that he's looking for happiness in life, or the purpose of life, however you want to say, the search for the, quote, delectable, however you want to phrase that. He's looking for the meaning of life or happiness in life. And it goes on and on and on of the different things that he tries. Well, Mathew was a philosopher, far more than Shillaber, I would say. Shillaber was plenty smart, but Mathew really was a seeker and a philosopher. It's far more plausible for Mathew just on the topic. Now let me put the carpetbag away gently. Here. This thing is, you can't find these. You can't even find a single edition of the carpetbag, no less a volume. Unbelievable that it came up. I paid $350 for that. Buy it now price on eBay. It's really, well, there was one that was signed by one of the contributors. It was Sylvanus Cobb's pseudonym. Not Fitzgerald, I can't think of it. Fitz Whistler, I think it is. And it sold for like 1,000 something. I think I dropped off at 800. So I feel really bad about kind of stealing this thing from the seller at $350. And I've often thought of, there's a story about a fellow who bought a rock at a yard sale that he knew was worth like thousands of dollars, you know. And I thought that's really unethical to do that. Well, this is kind of along the same line, but wouldn't have been able to afford it at 1,000, you know, at its real price. And it's crucial that it come home for my research and for what I'm doing. So if I had had the money, if I'd been wealthy, I would have told the guy, look, this is worth way more than $350 here, take $1,200, you know. But I'm not in a position to do that, so I'm afraid it was civil disobedience or whatever you would call a higher law intervening. But I wished I had the money to give that guy. Now, let's see, going back to my notes, we are going to move to the Piscatorian Brotherhood, which I have already mentioned before. And in it is a phrase, the free and easy, which Dr. Spooner also talks about the free and easy. Well, Dr. Spooner talks about seeking the delectable, whereas in the Piscatorian Brotherhood, Mathew talks about seeking the free and easy in very much the same language. I've talked about this Chronicles of the Piscatorian Brotherhood. I'll show you a microfilm copy of it because I only have microfilm in the Daily Delta where this appeared from New Orleans. This was apparently Mathew reporting his meeting with Southern sympathizers of the abolitionist movement or Southern members, operatives of the Underground Railroad. And he pretends that it's just a meeting of this club that goes fishing. See, the Piscatorian Brotherhood, well, the Piscatorian meaning fish. Piscatorian Brotherhood means the fishers of men, which means the Underground Railroad. And again, I think that he got found out because this is the very last he ever writes, you know, for the Daily Delta. That's it. So I think they caught him. It was supposed to be a series. But I just want to get into his comical search for the free and easy, which goes back to what Abby taught him. It goes back to Mathew's use of the pseudonym Trismegistus, because he would make comic use of these serious mystical teachings that Abby had given him. See, not that he didn't believe in it necessarily, but he would pull them into his humor. So this search for the truth, he would pull in and kind of use in a offhand way, see. So let's see, I'm going to go ahead and read down through the point where we get to the free and easy, and you'll get a sense of this. Editors of the Delta, as the pleasing task has been assigned me of recording and transmitting to you the sayings and doings of the capital C cordial fraternity, I must enjoin it upon you not to take anything that you may here find written for granted, but rather submit all the matter herein recorded to the test of your knowledge of the quote genus homo, or else try them by the capital C counsel of experience. Then, if they do not outrage the one or beggar the other, why, you may take them as they had been written on oath. So we're just now on code with that long paragraph. We're on notice, rather, that this is code. This capital O order has been created by the fraternization of the military with the civil and religious Mingos of Baton Rouge, and has for its object, as these veritable chronicles will abundantly set forth in the sequel, the discovery of the secret of the genuine, quote, free and easy, a secret which has occupied the attention of all the virtuosos, antiquarians, and savants since the ancients first began to write Anno Mundi down to the present time, A.D. 1848. And then it goes on with from history with Diogenes, from all the people that have sought to find the great free and easy. See? So that's Mathew's style. And just keep that in mind in the back of your mind right now, because Dr. Spooner also has another precedent in Mathew's work. Now, I had talked about Mathew's parody of the Raven in one of my blog entries called The Vulture, and I have positively identified that as his unsigned work, which first showed up in the Carpetbag in the December 18th, 1852 edition. And it had a series that came before it where Mathew apparently was kind of using the style of the British humor magazines like Punch and Cruikshank's Almanac, where they'd have little inline illustrations, which had not been done so much before. So Mathew had a whole series. One of those had to do with the Bunker Hill Monument and was written by someone who lived in Boston and could supposedly see the Bunker Hill Monument from his backyard. See? So another one of these, part of the same series, and this one also apparently with British illustrations. So this means this is the second of the series that Mathew contracted when he was over in Europe and probably met with George Henry Hines. It has to do with a Mr. Spoon. And Mr. Spoon is caught up with gold fever, which apparently was happening at the time. And he wants to go to California for gold. This is in the January 22nd, 1853 edition of the Carpetbag. Remember that the Vulture, which was done with the same kind of illustration, same artist apparently, had appeared the previous month in December. So what happens with Mr. Spoon is that he starts looking into it and he starts trying to, sleep in difficult conditions and kind of prepare himself, for the tough conditions of the journey and for living as a miner. And then he sees a panorama, which is like a movie would be today. You go and this huge scroll would go across the screen for the audience like a movie, like a mural, moving mural. So he goes to a panorama about the gold rush in California, and he's so discouraged that he gives up the whole idea and decides, well, it's just as well to stay home, too much hassle. So it's just Mathew's satire on that. In the Comic Almanac, Cruikshank's Comic Almanac, this is several years. If you go back to 1853, the last year in this volume, you will find at the beginning of it a calendar, a comic calendar. And each month has these little cartoons. And the characters for each month, they progress. So January has the same characters as February and March and so on, except that the story is told progressively through the months. Now I'll put this in, I'll do a close-up of this. At the very bottom of this is our character, Mr. Spoon. The very same illustrations, but now he has a different name. He is now Winkinson, and he is going to prospect for gold in Australia instead of in California. So this is very strange, but apparently Mathew, the way I put this together, Mathew had contracted probably with George Hine or possibly with Cruikshank himself to illustrate two of Mathew's humorous pieces. One of them, The Vulture, the parody of the Raven, and the other about Mr. Spoon, who wants to go prospecting. So Cruikshank basically reproduced the entire Vulture story, because it's in here with the illustrations redrawn, and Mr. Spoon is also redrawn. In its entirety, the Vulture is in here in 1853, which means it came after it appeared in the Carpetbag. I'm looking for the Vulture in here. It's in here, but it's going to take me too long to find it. Here it is. That's the Vulture as it appeared, exactly as it appeared in the December Carpetbag, except that the illustrations have been redrawn, and except that the second illustration does not appear in Cruikshank's, the one where the Vulture is first coming through the door. That's not in there. So here we have we have Winkinson, who wants to go prospecting in Australia, and he shows up in different months. Here he is getting arrested by a policeman, apparently. You can see in the corner there. And it goes on. That was March. No, that was May. And let's see. September, we got Wilkinson in his bed. And in October, we have Wilkinson having dinner with his elderly mother before he leaves, I think, or landlady maybe. So he's used the character and he's used the illustrations, but he's telling a somewhat different story than Mathew did. So Mathew has used the character Mr. Spoon already, is the point that I was making with that. So when he gets to Dr. Spooner, it's just a slight variation, on what he had done before. That's not Shillaber, I don't think. I think my gut, and this is what's interesting about it, is that I felt, this is mine. That was my intuition was telling me, and my intellectual self said, no, I don't have any reason to say that. No. Well, now I do have reason to say it. So I'm going to read a little bit examples, because this is first off, it's a long intellectual introduction, and then it's a long epic poem. I'll read some of it. Those who have been privileged, I'll get a little water. Slips of the tongue and asides and coughs and sipping water and all that, when you're doing it in person, it really doesn't seem all that distracting. But boy, you put it on video and oh my gosh, you really look like a bumbler, I do see, professional announcers on TV occasionally make slips and correct themselves, and they've learned how to do it very quickly. But I think it takes training not to do some of these things. I am not professional on-air talent. So he writes, those who have been privileged listeners of Dr. Dionysius Spooner, as he has described to them his adventures while in search of, quote, the delectable, will not be offended at this imperfect rendering of them, while others who have not been thus privileged will see in them the struggles of a great mind towards the attainment of an object, and may receive from their example an impetus in the right direction, as though it were from the toe of an intellectual boot energetically applied. The writer became acquainted with the doctor through a train of very singular yet natural circumstances, singular from the manner of their occurrence rather than from their character. And it goes on to where he kept hearing about this wonderful Dr. Spooner and finally had to introduce himself. And they became friends, even though Dr. Spooner is rather condescending. So that goes on like that. Now we have the poem, the modern syntax, Dr. Spooner in Search of the Delectable. On Monday morning, with the sun uprisked, good Dr. Spooner ate his steak in haste and hurried down his coffee and his twist, as though no moment he would idly waste, then took his cane with his sturdy fist, with animation on his features traced, and started forth in attitude reflectable, to seek, mid-airs mundane, the goal delectable. Before him lay the undeveloped scene that fate impatient waited him to show. He stood a moment with a thoughtful mien, M-I-E-N, as if uncertain which path he should go, then held his cane his fingertips between, that, by its falling, he his course might know. Northeast, 'tis well, now all my doubts at rest. Since chance so wills it, I'll go south-southwest. I'll do one more here in the introduction. Not he alone to go averse to fate. Some do, with all prognostics pointing clear, and full success attending at the gate. They do not stop propitian's hint to hear, but clutch at phantom shapes that tempting wait, till to their disappointment and their fear, they see their error and neglected track, with little hope of ever getting back. So Mathew the philosopher is holding forth. Now the question is, when did he write this? Blifkins was 10, 15 years earlier. I'm wondering if he didn't write this pretty close to the book's publication in 1873. If that's true, because Shillaber, unlike the previous book, The Life and Sayings of Mrs. Partington, Shillaber didn't sign this as the editor. He signed this himself. It's Partingtonian Patchwork by B.P. Shillaber. So my conclusion is that Mathew conceives of himself as ghostwriting for Shillaber at this point. He had done this for Francis Durivage before Francis Durivage betrayed him and stole his portfolio, and let Durivage use his own name, sign with his own name. I think he was ghostwriting a great deal of this book for Shillaber and let Shillaber sign it as himself. So this, of course, would be heresy to the scholars, but I mean, I've got so much background now, including the smoking gun there that I showed you with the star signature, because I can definitely, way beyond a reasonable doubt, prove that Mathew was writing as the star during that period before and after. And therefore, I can prove that Shillaber let Mathew write his own character, Ike Partington, for the carpetbag. So therefore, there's no reason to think that he might not have written other things here. So let me just grab some little bit at random in here, and then I'm done, I think. Okay, here's another avenue of exploration he takes on his quest for the delectable. He'd be a mason. Surely he could find within those ancient halls the thing he sought. It seemed delightful to his ardent mind that happiness, like onions, could be bought. And so he acted as he felt inclined, and soon was to the ancient gridiron, you pronounce that gridiron or gridiron? I don't know. Gridiron brought. Seeking for blissfulness one seldom sees, as lawyers get to heaven by degrees. He spread himself on mystic pins and seals, and knew more signs than doth the zodiac, was letter perfect in the springs and wheels of night trains running the mysterious track, took every step the order's scope reveals, until from the ineffable looking back, he wept like what's-his-name, who lived of yore, because he couldn't master something more. Now, the head of the Masonic order at this time in Boston was none other than his old enemy, Albert Pike, who had stolen Abbey's poetry. So it doesn't surprise me at all that he would be a bit jaundiced about the Masons in Boston, although Mathew had once belonged to a similar order, the Oddfellows, many years earlier. But I think this is a little bit of a dig at Albert Pike. Let's try the ending. Let's see. That wasn't far from the ending there. And then despairingly he made complaint. Oh, who can tell me where is happiness? With much endeavor I am worn and faint, and each step seems to show the progress less in striving for that boon which hope did paint, which seems more distant as my steps I press. Tell me, ye wise ones, in earth's mighty bound, tell me where may happiness be found? Here, stay your steps, my boy, a veteran spoke. I'm just the chap'll point you to the spot. I've sought for happiness through fire and smoke, my briarwood pipe, and here is where I've got. The search for happiness is but a joke, for which you needn't go all round the lot. I'll ease your caput of its great quandary. For delectation, see the dictionary. Then laughed aloud that execrable hind, while Dr. Spooner turned in strong disgust. But as he thought of it, he felt inclined to think the rough man's ribaldry was just. For to himself he said, I nowhere find the delectation of my hope and trust but in the book, and therefore I will wait, and let things happen, as it pleases fate. And then he took things as they came about, nor strove from fate his happiness to wring. At unpropitious luck he made no rout, but was serene as when joy's birds did sing, and in contentedness of purpose stout, he found himself happy as a king. feeling true delectation did not rest on anything outside the seeker's breast. Then there's a note afterwards. The author read the foregoing to a young and charming critic who had just completed the ecstatic story of, quote, the Bloody Hand or the Avenger of Darville, and she immediately suggested that if Dr. Spooner had found some amiable being worthy of his choice, as in the instance of which she had just read, he would undoubtedly have found the happiness he sought. It seemed to her that he had thrown away a great deal of valuable time. This again is classic MFW. First of all, he was a Stoic philosopher from very early. When Abby introduced the Greek philosophers to Mathew, he latched on to the Stoics. So that's his background, Stoicism. And this is kind of what we end up with, is a Stoic philosophy of just take things with equanimity, whatever comes, you know. My guru teaches something rather similar to that. But this note at the end is kind of like, it's, if I'm not mistaken, it's two-layered. The first layer is people aren't going to understand this because they just want popular literature. They just want to be entertained. They're not understanding what he's doing in the philosophy he's putting forth in humor. And remember that that was the editor's comment about The Raven, that this was a very strange mixture of humor and serious. That's Mathew Franklin Whittier's trademark. But there's another level to that, and that is that Mathew was happy with Abby, that he had found happiness with Abby, see? So, but he lost her. So I think it's also a reference to Abby, you know, that had he did find that happiness, but had he retained that, you know, had she lived, that he wouldn't have this long search for, you know, happiness and have gone through all of that. So that is, I haven't looked through this whole thing. Now, immediately after this is something called Oracular Pearls by Mrs. P. Pearls means little anecdotes. And this is where Benjamin Penhallow Shillaber excels. Little anecdotes in little tiny chapters. So I'm guessing that part was actually written by Shillaber. So I don't know if this is of interest to anybody. There's probably like 3 scholars in the world who are interested in Shillaber at this point, and as many who are interested in the carpetbag. These are little things. But what it does illustrate, I think, is the vast interconnected tapestry of Mathew's work and how you can dip into it at any point and find interconnections with all of these other different pseudonyms and different parts of Mathew's career. And some of them link up with the famous ones, like The Raven and Christmas Carol and so on. You know, like it links up with everything else. This has a couple little intersections, 2 or 3 intersections with The Raven. Not all of which I've gotten into, but you can take Shillaber and you can work that back to Mathew's authorship of The Raven. So when somebody wants me to provide the references, the scholarship that proves any of these things that I assert, like the one I was talking about yesterday concerning Mathew's unsigned review of Henry David Thoreau's talk. And how do I prove that? See, well, what he wants is like a Wikipedia reference. He wants me to find the authority who says this and cite him the journal and the year and the article title, you know, and the author's name, or the book where this is quoted by a great scholar from Oxford or somebody that, you know, is considered an expert and has gone through the system. See, well, this work is entirely outside the system. There's nobody to quote. There's nobody to cite, you know, except myself. And I have actually tried on a whim, on a peevish whim, I have tried to go in and edit Wikipedia pages. And the editor wipes it out and or challenges me. I need the reference. I need the citation. You can't just put this in here without the citation. And I told him, I'm the expert. I'm the source. You know, well, of course, that doesn't fly. This is how the status quo maintains itself and has kind of a blood-brain barrier that keeps not only poisons out, but everything, keeps everything nourishing out also, if it's new. See, anything new is kept out of the system this way. One final aside before I stop this. Yesterday I got on eBay, and I have these saved searches. So the saved search came up in my email, Mathew F. Whittier. I have every possible permutation of Mathew's name in my eBay saved searches. So it came up Mathew F. Whittier, and I got in there. There was a charcoal drawing of Mathew for sale, framed. Well, it was only $30. I jumped on it and bought it. And then I go back and say, wait a minute. And I go back and read it, and it says contemporary, because I'd actually written the guy and said, do you know anything about the history of this? And I go back, wait a minute. He says it's contemporary. Well, he did it. He wrote me that his father was really interested in the Whittier family, and for some reason he was particularly drawn to Mathew, and he did this very nice charcoal drawing of Mathew Franklin Whittier based on the known etching. So, that's $35 with shipping I didn't really need to spend. It'll have a nice place up in my wall, and if there's ever a museum for Mathew, which I hope there is, it'll have a nice little place on the wall in the museum. But this was typical of Mathew, that he would get fooled, he was gullible, he would jump in, and do silly things like that. And he actually makes fun of himself in the Quails Travelogue, which was not written by Ashen Dodge, as the scholars believe, but by Mathew Franklin Whittier. He talks about someone in the third person who went to Boston to buy stocks in a railroad, and he misread the name of the railroad, and he bought a basically worthless stock for, relatively little money, thinking he was getting a great bargain, on the stock that he thought it was. It would have been a great deal, but it actually was a basically worthless stock. Kennebec and something here in Portland, And he writes about that third person, but I immediately knew intuitively that was autobiographical. That was himself. He had done that, I can't prove that, but I just know it. There's certain things I just know. So Mathew made fun of himself having that same trait, that he would just jump in, do something impulsively. I still have that. So I'm going to have a very tasteful, very nicely interpreted contemporary charcoal drawing of Mathew Franklin Whittier. I may even cut in his photograph of the thing here, just so you can see it. The original photograph from which the etching had been done shows Mathew's sadness and his frustration. At the time, I think he was particularly feeling it when this was done. The etching that was done for Samuel Picard's book on John Greenleaf Whittier, The Life and Letters of John Greenleaf Whittier, takes some of that out. But this guy put it back in. He put the sadness and the kind of faraway gaze, he put that back in. I think that's kind of interesting. Intuitively, he saw that in the etching and kind of replaced it. I almost thought about telling him, but he'll never know that the reincarnation of Mathew Franklin Whittier bought his drawing. He had said, well, his father told him it was really good, and he thought that, he thought he'd put it on eBay, or that somebody might like it somewhere, someone might appreciate it. Well, he appreciated his own portrait, but he'll never know. So anyway, I hope you found this interesting, at least if you like detective work. Again, I just wanted, really, aside from kind of making a historical marker about this discovery, I wanted to show how I do this research and how all of these things are interconnected. And when somebody asks me to prove one of these things, I have all of these 2,300 pieces by Mathew more or less in my head, at least an impression of them, a sense of them. I can usually find them in the database if I have to. I know how all these things fit together. And I know how I have verified that Mathew was signing as the star. I know how I verified that he was Poins. I know all of these pseudonyms, how I verified them. I know how I verified all of the famous ones. I know the depth of the background that goes into establishing Mathew as the author of The Raven. But how to tell anybody, you know, they'd have to read all 2,300 of them. They'd have to read my books, the 2,240 pages of my first book and the 700 pages of my second book. And if they really read that with an open mind, then they would have not quite the background I have, but they would have the background. They'd have the whole tapestry. And then it would make sense. They say, of course, he and Abby wrote Christmas Carol. Of course, he was the author of The Raven. But I can't induce anybody to read those books and enjoy them and really get into them. And I can't graft on the depth of my knowledge of Mathew's background onto people in an email, you know, or even a paper. Nonetheless, the paper that is now going to appear within the next couple weeks in Real Paranormal Magazine sets forth a strong case that Mathew and Abby were the original authors of A Christmas Carol. The next edition is going to deal with The Raven and Edgar Allan Poe. I can't remember the order of the next two. The next one, I think, will deal with Elizabeth Barrett Browning and then Margaret Fuller. You know, I really put the best argument I can put in those articles. By the time I get to the fourth one, I have now discovered an author that was completely missed by the historians, whose work was pilfered and falsely claimed by a whole bunch of people, including some people who are now famous for them. You know, Charles Dickens, Edgar Allan Poe, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, Margaret Fuller, all those people basically built their fame on Mathew's stolen work. If that's not a discovery, I don't know what is. It's too good. It's too big. Like in my written blog, I talked about the Rock of Gibraltar, that if you're right up against the Rock of Gibraltar, all you see is a big gray slab. See, you don't see the rock. You have to back away to see the whole rock. But you have to back away and see the whole picture of Mathew's life and his legacy in order to see these things, you know. But it's a huge discovery, and I literally cannot get anybody to take me seriously. It's really amusing when you think about it. It's bizarre to have discovered something that big and not be taken seriously by a single soul, you know, and the whole planet. Millions and millions of people on the internet are watching dogs and kittens play, and not a single person takes this seriously. And here's the thing, if anybody did take it seriously in academia, the first thought that's going to come to their mind is, how can I steal this? How can I, as an important academic, get it away from this reincarnation believing idiot, see, you know, who's got no credentials at all. Their first impulse is not going to be, gee, we want to give him an honorary doctorate. We want to invite him in to talk to our class at Cambridge or Oxford, you know, or Harvard. No. It's like, how can we get rid of this guy so that we can claim it for ourselves? Because if a child has picked up a diamond off the street and a jeweler comes by and sees it, if he's not a man of great integrity, what's going to be his rationalization? What's going to be his thought? Let's look at this and then slip him a worthless piece of quartz, and he won't know the difference, and I'll just pocket the diamond. See? That same thing, I think, would happen among scholars if they ever understood what this is, you know. Especially if they ever cite this thing, which they're going to have to cite me because I'm too prominent to ignore, and the internet it's too easy to find me on the internet. They're going to have to bring in reincarnation. And boy, are they going to be loath to bring in reincarnation, because I've also proved my own case, you know, that I was Mathew Franklin Whittier. It's the only way I could ever have discovered this stuff. You know, what I say is that the scholars have had, 150 years or more, and they've all failed miserably to find this discovery. I could only find it because I was Mathew, and because in going back into my own legacy, I discovered these things. See, so they have to bring in reincarnation, And they are going to be kicking and screaming to avoid bringing in reincarnation because 90% of them are probably atheists. So this is a real nuisance, this thing I've discovered. Anyway, we're starting with this first article in this extremely unlikely seeming magazine, because this magazine deals a lot with ghost hunting and poltergeists and exorcisms, and there's a few PhDs writing in this thing, and they have a few other more elevated topics, but by and large, these are ghost hunters and such, see? And the editor has chosen them because he feels that they're authentic. So that's the company I keep, and that's where this article is going, because he gave me carte blanche. He says, you write anything you want as long as you want, And scholarly journals won't give me the time of day, I'm pretty sure, whereas this guy's giving me absolutely full free reign. So I'm going with him, but then I posted on Academia EDU, I put in the search keywords, Charles Dickens, Christmas Carol, Victorian literature, 19th century, literature, and they find it. And then I've decided I'm going to personally contact every professor I can find in every college and send him a link to that article on Academia EDU. And then we'll see. Now, when I've done stuff like this in the past, nothing happens, And I always think about the James Leininger, I don't know how it's pronounced, the case that got on mainstream TV. I forget which show it first premiered on, but this is a strongly proven, genuine reincarnation child case where the little boy remembered being a World War II pilot shot down, and then it was verified, period. That case showed up on mainstream media, and then it was ignored after that. That's a total game changer. Everything, all of science should have immediately stopped, and everything based on philosophical materialism in science should have been thrown out in the trash the day after that show appeared. If you want to talk logic, if you want to say that science is based on rational thinking and logic, the day after that show hit the airwaves, science should have been completely revolutionized. But everything went on as usual. The sun came up, everybody went to work, everybody went to lunch. Scientists continued to be materialists. Officially, materialism is the religion of Western society. Nothing changed. So this by itself is bizarre, So I may put this article out there. I may bring it to the attention of every single Dickens scholar in the world that I can possibly find, which will take me a month or two, and nothing may happen. Every single one of them will either not look at the article, or they'll look at it briefly and dismiss it. They might joke about it with a colleague, but they've seen it. They've seen my claim. They've seen that there is an article. They know that somebody has put their mark on the thing. See, it's been published. Nobody will be able to claim that that's their idea, Meanwhile, other scholars are coming out with the dirt on Charles Dickens. John Bowen tells us that he's found evidence in correspondence that Charles Dickens, later in life, had a long-time affair with a young actress, which we know, although he tore up all the letters and denied it, sanctimoniously and vehemently denied it in what's called his violated letter. Look that up online. But then he tried to have his faithful wife, Catherine, put away in a Victorian insane asylum to get her out of the way so he could have his affair. See? She was disposable because she was old and had gained weight, and she wasn't attractive to him anymore. But he was really an ass, So that kind of research is being done by other scholars, and Dickens' real character is coming out. So eventually, scholars are left with this weird situation did this guy write A Christmas Carol? And some people may think, oh yeah, anybody could write something like that, just in imagination, see? Well, they couldn't. That story has spiritual power. A person like this cannot write like that. And he never was able to write like that again. Like Albert Pike, who said, I never was able to write poetry like I did at first, because it wasn't his poetry, it was Abby Poyen's poetry. Eventually, that's going to dawn on people. They're going to be driven to go back and question whether Charles Dickens could possibly have written A Christmas Carol. It'll happen without me. But meanwhile, I'm published. I'm published, and every single one of them is on notice that I published. So, but then there's this reincarnation thing. Can we get it away from him? No, we can't get it away from him. But if we introduce it, if I cite this, there comes reincarnation in, because the guy's proven his case. But if we don't cite it, somebody else is going to find it because it's all over the internet. So we can't avoid citing it, because somebody else is going to say, look what you missed, So I've got them in a vice grip, basically. So whether a single one of those people ever responds when I send the link to this article, they are on notice. See, so I'm telling you what I'm planning here. Now, what the end result will be, I don't know, but then the 1-2 punch comes when in 3 months, I publish an even more compelling article about The Raven and Edgar Allan Poe. Now you've got a historical author that's been entirely missed, who wrote both, co-authored A Christmas Carol and wrote The Raven. And Jeff Keane says, well, nobody cares. My friend Jeff Keane says, nobody's going to care. I think they will. Then you've got that same author wrote 4 poems that made Elizabeth Barrett Browning famous, that launched her career, including Lady Geraldine's Courtship, which is the one that all the critics liked. Wasn't hers. That was Matthew's description of his courtship with Abby when she was tutoring him. And then you've got Margaret Fuller. The F-signed pieces in the dial for the first 2 years, that's Franklin. That's not Fuller. That's Mathew. And I got a smoking gun on that too. And the star-signed reviews. Let me go get something and I'll cut this. I'll cut out the interval where I go to get it. This book, Margaret Fuller, Critic, Writings from the New York Tribune, 1844 to 1846, by Judith Matson Bean and Joel Meyerson. This is with a little bit of commentary. Basically, this is just the star-signed pieces in the 1844-1846 New York Tribune, which Mathew wrote. These guys had no idea that Mathew Franklin Whittier wrote those and that Margaret Fuller falsely claimed them. It started as a rumor, and not everybody bought it. But she kind of said, the rumor got started because she was the literary editor of the paper. And they said, did you write this? And she said, yes, I did. I admit it, Well, she didn't, except with a couple exceptions. And sometimes I think she inserted her own paragraphs. And sometimes Mathew had to write around the corner when he disliked or disapproved of somebody's writing, and Fuller was a big fan. He had to be careful how he wrote. But Mathew wrote these. They even have a CD in the back. This book sells for like $167 on eBay, or $127 or something, depending on which one you get. I got this much less. It was I got it from Thrift Books for much less. So they have no idea. And what happens to these people's reputation? What happens to this book and the authenticity of this book when they realize that they were totally and completely wrong about this? So this is a huge, and it should be a rather alarming discovery for an awful lot of people, And what's amusing to me is that as I say, I've got $1 million check, a good check, and I can't get a single bank to honor it. So I'm sitting on this discovery and I can't get a single person to be interested in it. That's my frustration. I've gone on and on. I'm getting to an hour here, and nobody probably watches these to the hour point anyway. So I hope you found some of this of interest. Every day I say, well, that's the last entry I'm going to do. And every day something occurs to me that I want to do one more. That's the way it's been going for a couple of weeks now. I hadn't intended to do one of these a day. So I've got other things to do today. It takes like most of the day to process these things and edit them. I've got to shoot the photographs. I've got to edit them in and everything else. And then there's all this rendering time, so the day is pretty much taken up with making one of these entries, which is why I end up posting them in the evening. So I hope that somebody's finding them of interest. Frankly, I need advertising funds because I can approach the scholars, but I don't have the funds necessary to approach the public. And I really need to hit both at the same time. I need to bring this to people's attention. I have used free methods like everywhere that there's an instance of the Christmas Carol or anybody lecturing about a Christmas Carol on YouTube, I have put links to a blog entry that I wrote that has to do with a Christmas Carol. And it's been seen quite a bit, maybe 100 times, something like that. So I can reach to the public for free with methods like that. I don't do like mass emails or any nonsense like that. But Facebook ads or Google ads, or I don't know, there should be some way to throw some advertising money at this effectively and bring it to the attention of the public at the same time that I'm laboriously bringing it to the attention of academics by writing to them. But for that, I need funding. And I am living on my Social Security and a very small inheritance, which I'm watching gradually go down, down, down while I'm waiting for the pandemic to be over. Then I have to go try to get a part-time job if I'm not selling any books, which I'm not. I sold one recently. And if I go to take a part-time job, if they Google me, you see what comes up. Put my name in there, Stephen Sakellarios, and see what comes up. You've got all kinds of crazy looking stuff about reincarnation and believing that I was this author and that, that I wrote The Raven in my past life and A Christmas Carol. And, would you hire that person even to like sweep out your trash? Would you trust him to even be in your building? No less hire him for any kind of important job. See, so the only kind of job I could get is jobs where they just don't check, where they don't Google my name. I think most people do now when they hire somebody. When they do a background check, well, I pass the background check fine because I, keep my nose clean pretty much, for all of my life. So I pass the background check, but if they do a Google check, a personal check, they're going to come up with this stuff. And I think most people, even in the most liberal area, unless I was right smack in the middle of California somewhere, are going to hire me. That means I'm being shunned, which means that I don't know that I can even earn a living. This is what I meant by having to hit 88 miles an hour like the Back to the Future. Because I don't know that I can even get a job, even a menial job. And the other thing that happens, and this has happened to me in the past, even before I found Mathew, I think, because they won't tell you. But if I get the job and they didn't check, somebody Googles my name and finds it, and then they find a way to get rid of me. We can't have this guy working for us. This is too weird. We got to get rid of him. So they find some way to push me out. See? So all that's to say that if I'm going to go forward with this, I think I need some funding. And I've changed the page on the link on my homepage that talks about how you can, assist me in the work. I've just revised that to explain what I just explained now. Again, I may look into Patreon and maybe if I can set it up in such a way that everybody gets to see the same thing, no matter what tier they're in, if I can kind of work the system that way, I might set up a Patreon or some other crowdsourcing. But how's anybody ever going to see it? I don't have that many friends, and I don't have any friends, but I have very few friends, maybe like 1 or 2 friends. Because here's the thing about friends, if you can't tell them what's important to you in your life, And if they don't believe you, what kind of friendship is that? You can talk about the weather for just so long, or I can talk about them for a while. But when it comes to talk about me, if I'm really going to honestly talk about me, well, I'm married to a ghost and I wrote The Raven and A Christmas Carol. So there, now it's a friendship like Mathew had with Shillaber. See, that's their friendship, was where Shillaber didn't believe him and thought he was crazy, but he kind of liked him and thought he was eccentric, and he kind of laughed at him, and wrote these humorous stories about him as though he was just a kind of a crazy bumbler. See, well, that's the kind of friendships that I can have now. By and large, with just about anybody, that's the kind of friendship I have. If they like me and if I'm honest about myself, they don't believe a word I'm saying. See? So therefore, I need advertising funds if I'm going to reach the public, because I'm just not getting to people. We now have 8 people max who will watch these video blogs, and I'm guessing they don't get all the way to the end. But even if they do, it's not growing. Nobody else is looking at them, Well, I'm probably not that entertaining, unless you like somebody that bumbles and forgets what he was saying and stuff. Anyway, if anyone feels inclined to donate and I get a few, what I'll do is set up some kind of accounting mechanism so that I can report on exactly what the funds were used for. And I'll also take suggestions, because I'm not great at advertising. Should I go with Facebook? Should I go with Google ads? Should I look for something else? Billboards. I can put my mug on billboards. Who is this guy? And do his whole series. I'm not going to have that kind of money. So I'm open to suggestions, and I think this would be a good time to fund this project. The problem with asking for funds is there are so many crying needs out there. There's so many places to donate. Over and over, I see these appeals for funding from good, worthy, the poor people in Yemen and, all these places of refugees, and goes on and on and on, that people are desperately need money right now. How can I ask for money? The only thing I can say is that these charities are working downstream, if you understand my meaning. This is when philosophical materialism has done its worst to distort society, and we end up with climate disasters, and we end up with social disasters, and we end up with a huge disparity in incomes because of social Darwinism that took over the minds of people in the West, and the medical suffering that's going on because of materialism, when they don't understand the way that the mind interacts with the body, and on and on. And these are all the downstream effects. Well, you can throw money at the downstream suffering, but I'm working upstream. I'm trying to attack materialism itself. I'm trying to not bring, because I can't bring spirituality. That's the province of the real spiritual masters and the higher beings. What I can do is help to clear the underbrush, help to, break away the dam. The weak point in the dam is reincarnation, because reincarnation can be proved. So I am focusing all my attention, including my personal attention. I put myself there with all of my energy, attention, with all of my being. I'm put right on to reincarnation, because if you break the reincarnation brick in the dam, the whole thing gives way. See? So I'm upstream. Therefore, that's the only way I could justify asking for funds, is that I'm working upstream, and that if spirituality re-enters Western society, all of these other problems dissolve and are healed. So once again, thank you for watching.